Good evening, very warm welcome to everybody. Welcome to Anglo-Ruskin University. Welcome to, drum roll, the inaugural lecture of Professor Melanie Bell. I say always at inaugural lectures that they are happy events. They are an occasion for the whole university to come together and celebrate the success and welcome new professors, either professors joining us from outside, or as in this case, colleagues whose career has been so successful and so stellar that they have achieved the professorship. But I was particularly looking forward to this one, I have to say, because I've known Melanie since I first came here, and she's just a legendary colleague, really generous, passionate about discipline, passionate about her students and her colleagues. A colleague whose research career and trajectory has been amongst us as one of us, and that's really exciting. So yeah, I'm particularly up for this evening. Now I'm looking forward to it. So thank you all very much for coming. We're going to have a lecture, we're going to have a Q&A afterwards, and then there's a reception after that. I didn't probably say who I was, but I'm Roderick Watkins, Vice Chancellor. But I do now have the great pleasure in passing over to Professor Catherine Lee, Pro-Vice Chancellor and Dean of the Faculty, who is going to properly introduce this evening's speaker. Catherine.
Roderick. So, unlike Roderick, I have notes. So, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Melanie Bell, Professor of Quantitative Linguistics, quantitative linguistics even, in our faculty. So many of you will know that Mel started her career as a psychiatric nurse, where her interest in human cognition and communication began. Melanie worked with patients whose first language was not English, and TESOL qualifications soon followed, and from there, Mel's passion for language was ignited. Mel won a fully funded PhD scholarship in English language and applied linguistics and studied at the other university in Cambridge, but we're not going to hold that against you, Mel. But Melanie came to ARU 30 years ago almost, first as an associate lecturer before taking on part-time and then full-time roles. She's had a number of leadership roles during that time. She's been our Director of Learning and Teaching, our Research Lead, and REF co-convener. Mel's also been a faculty lead for researcher development and a regular mentor on ARU's Aurora leadership program for women. And what these roles show us, that Melanie is someone who does an enormous amount to develop others and enable their success. And as you'll see tonight, Mel's a pretty special researcher too. A colleague in our faculty, when I first arrived, described Melanie to me as a rigorous and collegiate thinker who can always be relied on to ask the less than obvious questions. And that sounds about right. You've led a host of international collaborations, and I think you get the prize for the guests that have travelled the furthest. We've got people here tonight from Germany that have come just to see Mel's lecture, so thank you for making the trip, and yeah, that says a lot about you. So a host of international collaborations. You've attracted prestigious national and international funding, including not one but two prestigious Mercator fellowships. Your contribution to your field is extensive. You're editor of Mental Lexicon, a highly regarded research journal on the processing of words in the mind and brain. You've published extensively. You're a regular keynote at conferences and has served as an external expert for the European Commission and is a regular examiner of both UK and German PhDs. Although tonight's about celebrating Mel's academic career, I also want to pay personal tribute to Mel as a person. Mel was one of the first people to say hello and take me for a cup of coffee when I joined this faculty almost a year ago. And after 2 minutes in a company, hearing that gorgeous accent that makes me homesick for the Northwest every time Mel speaks, I instantly saw what our faculty, everyone in our faculty, has known for a number of years. Mel is a much-loved, generous, supportive, encouraging, and warm colleague. And we're really lucky to have her in our faculty and to have her at ARU. So please enjoy your evening and show your support for our wonderful friend and colleague, Professor Melanie Bell.
Okay, so I want to start with the most important thing, which is to say thank you. Thank you to everyone who's here this evening, either here in the room or online. I know that there are probably twice as many people with us online. And thank you also to the people who can't be here, but who have nevertheless done so much to bring me to this point. As will become apparent from my talk, everything I've achieved has been with the support, encouragement, and love of other people, especially Mike and my children, who I'm absolutely thrilled are with us here in the room tonight. If you've read the blurb about this talk, you'll know that the thing that fascinates me is how language really works. Because a moment ago, I just said thank you. And hopefully you somehow got the idea that I feel deeply indebted to lots of other people. Somehow the idea of gratitude got out of my consciousness into your consciousness. And truly, all I did was make the air vibrate. How does that work? I have no idea. Okay, so I'm not going to tell you the answer, but that's just to let you know what it is that kind of motivates me, why I'm so fascinated by this thing that we call language. It's been hard to know where to pitch this talk and where to start, but I'm going to start in 1995, when I came to Anglia Polytechnic University, as it then was, to teach a class on English pronunciation for people whose first language was not English. It was great because the class was 2 hours a week, which meant that I could spend the rest of the week at home with my daughters, Annie and Tuscany, and from the following year when he was born, with my son, Malachi, as well. The people I was teaching were often very advanced learners of English as a foreign language, and they just, for whatever reason, wanted to sound a bit more British. And one of the things that they tended to really struggle with was where to put the emphasis in pairs of nouns. So, for example, I remember one particular Spanish speaker saying, "Oh, I've lost my credit card, I've lost my credit card." And being slightly deaf, I was really struggling to know what she was on about. And I then realized that she meant credit card. So she said to me, "Well, you know, why is it credit card and not credit card?" Well, there are answers. I took this from an English teaching YouTube video just this week. And it said, if you've got a compound noun, you put stress on the first word. And if you've got a descriptive noun phrase, you put stress on the second word. So, for example, if you say the president lives in the White House, that's a compound noun. That's where the American president lives. If you say he lives in a white house, that's just a descriptive phrase. And it's just any old house that's white. So far, so good. But then when you get into pairs of nouns, it becomes a bit tricky. So if we say he lives in Oxford Street, that's a compound noun, okay. If we say he lives in Oxford Road, is that a descriptive phrase? Really. And it gets really complicated. So often in this, when students said to me, "Well, how do I know whether it's a phrase or a compound?" I'd be kind of reduced to saying, "Well, it's a compound if it's stressed on the first one, and it's a phrase if it's stressed." Okay, you get the problem. And this really niggled me. It really niggled me. So when I was doing my MPhil, Jim Blevins, who was teaching us syntax, happened to mention this issue, and he said, "Oh, that would make a good PhD for someone." So I ran down to his office immediately after. I said, "Has anyone else said they want to do the PhD on nouns and compounds?" Imagining that everyone would want to do it. And he said, "No, you can if you want." So I said, "Oh, great." And of course, I was especially thrilled that he was willing to supervise it. Jim said to me, "Just look at it, Melanie, just look at it. There's data available now that hasn't been available before." And the data that was available, this was about the time that home computers were becoming common, that computers were becoming, desktop size and that the internet was taking off. And we had access to things called corpora, which were big data sets of language. So here's an example. This is the British National Corpus, which is a statistically representative sample of 100 million words of late 20th century British English. So I could ask the BNC, if you can see up there, I've just asked it for sequences of 2 singular nouns, and it's given me 1.15 million examples, which is plenty to be going on with. So what this meant, having these corpora, meant that I could take a statistically representative sample of compounds, rather than ones I'd just made up, and I could find out how people pronounce them. So, true to my natural science roots, I did a little experiment, and I put 1,000 compound nouns into a standard carrier sentence. She told me about the do-do-do, and asked people to read it aloud. Some of my poor subjects are here tonight with us in the room and may well remember doing this. So I got 4 people for each of the 1,000 compound nouns that I had randomly sampled. And what did I find? Well, I found that in about a third of the time, all 4 speakers pronounced them with stress on the first noun. In about a third of the time, they all put it on the second noun. And in the other third of the times, half of them said one thing and half of them said the other. So at this stage, my belief in noun phrases as 2 different entities was kind of out the window. And I realized that wasn't going to be the solution to the problem. Another thing that I did notice was that just to say, when I talk about families here, I don't mean my biological family, I mean the family of words. So World Champion, World Council, World Cup, and World Leader are representatives of the world compound family. And what I noticed was that in cases where a certain first word had lots and lots of followers in the corpus, so these aren't made up, these were taken from the corpus, if there were lots and lots of these, it was more likely that the stress would be on the second word. And actually, that's just part of a much more general principle, which is that we stress the most informative part. So if you're speaking and you want to draw your listener's attention to something, then you tend to put emphasis on it. And if you've got lots and lots of things all modified by the same first word, then what you want to do is draw attention to those different things, perhaps. That was my theory. Oops-a-daisy. Okay, so this brings me on to 2006, when I was horrified to discover that in this town, Siegen in Germany, there was a group of researchers looking into exactly the same research question as I was doing. So I flew into a panic and I went to Jim and I said, oh God, I'll never be able to make a contribution because Ingo Plag and his team are going to find everything out before me. And Jim said, no, actually, this is great because it gives you a peer group, it gives you a group of people that are interested in the same thing as you. So I went off to a conference in Manchester, actually, where I met Ingo Plag and Gero Kunter, one of his PhD students, and I was delighted to discover that not only were we all interested in English compounds, but actually we all got on pretty well as well. And Ingo invited me to go to Siegen to meet the rest of his team and to talk to them about compounds, where I also met Sabina Arndt-Lapper. And Gero and Sabina really came like my research brother and sister. And it meant so much to me to have them alongside me when I was finishing my PhD. The other thing they taught me, Ingo, Gero and Sabina, was about something called regression analysis, which is a kind of statistical analysis. And what happens with regression is that if you have lots of things that are all contributing to some phenomenon, regression analysis enables you to tease them apart. So if, for example, I don't know, you thought that IQ, if we believed in IQ, is determined by a combination of, let's say, something to do with your upbringing and something to do with your age or something to do with your income or whatever, regression analysis would enable you to tease these things apart. and separate out the effect of one predictor from the effect of another. So with Ingo's help, I did a regression analysis of my PhD data. And this is what we found. In these graphs, the y-axis each time is the probability that a compound noun will receive what we call right stress. So something like silk shirt. And there are lots of predictors. These are all predictors taken from the literature. So these ones across the top are all to do with meaning. So if I take this one, for example, if there's a made-of relation, so something like silk shirt, the shirt is made of silk, then if that's true, then it's much more likely that you'll get right stress, but it's still not 100%. Because, for example, you know, we get apple pie made of apple, but apple cake. So none of these things are 100%. Yeah. Here we've got an effect of spelling. So if a compound is more often written as one word without a space, then it's more likely to be left stressed. But again, it's not categorical. So you get something like manhood with left stress, but mankind with right stress. This is my family size effect, the informativity effect, which it turns out, I mean, I've noticed it qualitatively, but it turns out to be statistically true as well, that the bigger the family of a modifier, or of, this is the modifier actually, this is the head, the bigger the family, the more likely it is that stress will be on the other noun. But none of these things are categorical. So you absolutely can't say, these things have these set of properties and their compounds, and these things have another set of properties and their phrases. It just doesn't work like that. But the idea that compounds and phrases are different comes from a theoretical model of language in which phrases and words are quite different. So in this model of language, you've got this central process here, which is what we call syntax or grammar. And the idea is that words and other lexical items are input to the process, and they go through some sort of a thing, syntax, and what comes out is a phrase. And so in this model, you have to make a distinction between words and phrases. But there are other models of grammar. One of them is called construction grammar. And this is a theoretical framework that I've used in my work with Carmen Portero Munoz at the University of Córdoba. Just to briefly tell you what construction grammar is, in construction grammar, we view language as a network of constructions. So a construction could be a word, it could be what would be called a phrase, it could be a sentence, it could be just a couple of words. And each construction is a pairing of some form, so that means some sound or some writing with some meaning. There's no absolute separation here between grammar and vocabulary. Oops-a-daisy. And the form is associated directly with some meaning. We view language as usage-based, emerging from the experience of a speaker, the linguistic experience, but actually the world experience, so the totality of one's experience in conjunction with the language that you're exposed to. So Carmen, we were looking at the corpus for something else, and Carmen said to me, I'm noticing something that's really strange, Mel. Lots of people are writing these things without apostrophes. I said, yeah. So just to show you what these things are, their expressions were that start with a number, so 10, 24, 44, then some sort of a time word, and then another noun phrase. And Carmen knows much more about English grammar than I do, and she said, well, look, according to the books, these things, this is just wrong. There should be an apostrophe. But she said, there are so many of them. It's not like the odd mistake. There are so many of these things written without an apostrophe that it can't just be a mistake. But according to the textbooks, it shouldn't be there. So here are some examples with the apostrophe. This is what she was expecting to see. Oh, these things, BNC, by the way, that's the reference to the corpus. So we decided to look at it and see if there really was, you know, if the apostrophe had any meaning, if we could recognize two constructions. We used regression again, and this meant that we were able to put in loads of different potential predictors So my wonderful, wonderful student interns, and I have to give a shout out here, at least one of them's in the room, at least one of them's online, I know. Over the years, I've been blessed to have a whole series of undergraduate research interns without whom I could not have done anything that I've done. Thank you. They coded, would you believe, about 14,000 sentences for all of these variables. Things about the kind of text, things about how it was written, things about the grammar, things about the length of the phrase, things about the frequency, and about the meaning. What did we find? Almost nothing significant, except the text type, okay? So this is unpublished writing, this is news text, this one here is academic text, and this is fiction. So people were most likely to use an apostrophe in fiction, and least likely in unpublished writing, and kind of 50-50 in news output. We concluded from this that they were not different constructions because we couldn't correlate the presence or absence of the apostrophe with any difference in meaning. Actually, sorry, Carmen, but I've changed my mind a bit. Because actually, I think the apostrophe does mean something. I think it tells you something about the history of this text. I think it tells you something about how much it's been subjected to the attention of an editor. Because, you know, unpublished stuff hasn't been through an editorial process, and it's kind of like a third of the time people put an apostrophe. News, well, I guess a lot of news text is on a very tight deadline, so there isn't time for it to go through lots of editorial revision. And then with these other kinds of text, you're getting much more adherence to some sort of prescriptive notion of what stuff should look like. So the apostrophe actually does tell you something, I think. Just on the subject of what things mean, you might remember back to when I showed you what the textbooks say about compounds and phrases. The text talked about a descriptive phrase. And at some point I had the idea that maybe some noun-noun combinations were more semantically transparent than others. Maybe they were the ones called phrases. And so I really got interested in semantic transparency. And I met Martin Schaefer, my great friend now, who was also interested in semantic transparency. We met at a conference and started talking about it, and we decided to look into it. So again, we wanted to take a sample of compounds and find out how people interpreted them, what they thought they meant. To do this, we didn't want to use established compounds because, take laptop, for example. Laptop could mean, you know, the surface of your body, but we all just know it means a computer. And we didn't want to test people's memory. We wanted to find out what their actual interpretation was. We didn't want to just make stuff up. And so we used what we called a tested novel compound, which basically means a compound that only occurs once. So we know someone's actually used it sometime, but only once in a very large corpus. And here we used a corpus called UK-WAC, which is about 2 billion words. So we got these tested novel compounds and just said to people, what do you think this means? And then we categorized their responses. So here's an example. Monkey ring was an attested novel compound. Some people would say things like, oh, it's a ring with a monkey on it, or a ring with a monkey decoration. Other people would say, oh, it's some monkeys standing in a circle, or a ring of monkeys. And so we would categorize, this we categorized as one interpretation, and this one as another. And actually, this is partly depends how you interpret ring, of course, because in one case, ring is a piece of jewellery, and in the other case, it's just a circular shape. Same with monkey. In this case, monkey is an animal, and in this case, it's just the image of the animal. So we did this, and what we found was the amount of variation in interpretation was like way more than in our wildest imaginings we'd anticipated that it would be. People do not agree. People do not see things in the same way. So this is just one of many graphs that I could have shown you. This on the x-axis here This is the percentage of participants who gave the most frequent response. And up here on the y-axis is the number of compounds that this applies to. So you can see this is most of the compounds here, in most cases, slightly less than half of the people agreed on the most frequent response. And in not one single case, these are the different points, there's no point here. There was not one single compound where everyone agreed what it would mean. This was to do with the meaning of the nouns themselves. So, of course, in reality, you would always see a new compound in a context, and does the context help? Okay, so what do you think rush course means? You can all just think it in your heads. Most people say either it means like a crash course, so a course where you learn something in a hurry, or it means like something like a go-kart track or something where you're going round really fast. Here are some examples in context. So in this one, rush course in skiing or snowboarding, quick preparation. So here it is actually a quick course. How about this one? Okay. Some people might think that means a quick course as well. But if you know that rushes are things like this, that you can weave, then you might realize that, you do a course on weaving rushes and you can apply it to willow as well. How about this one? Rush course for medical students. I wonder how many of you know what that means. Okay, so the intended interpretation of these things depends not just on the linguistic context, not just on the sentence that you find it in, but very largely on your encyclopedic knowledge. Unless you know that rush can be a kind of plant, you've got no chance of getting the intended interpretation of that. Unless you know rush stands for rapid ultrasound shock and hypertension, you have got no chance of knowing that this isn't just some kind of crash course in medicine. Because I've realized that actually context, when we talk about language in context, it's often less about the textual context and much more about the encyclopedic knowledge, the general experience of the universe in which these things happen. Okay, this brings us to 2013. I had a grant from the British Academy to go to Tübingen to learn more about quantitative techniques. And here I met Harold Byron and his wonderful team. Many of here, I hope, are online. And he taught me particularly about computational modeling. So when we talk about computational modeling, what we mean is, in order to do, I'm going to read this because I'll get it garbled otherwise, but in order to understand how humans learn and process language by implementing human-like learning and speech processing capabilities as computational algorithms. So we basically try to teach the computer language. And it's much quicker and more efficient than having to recruit loads and loads of human participants, because obviously getting human beings to participate in language experiments takes a lot of their time, costs a lot of money because you have to, you have to book the lab and you have to reimburse them for their travel expenses. And, getting the computer to do it is much more efficient and you can get results much more quickly. And in particular, taught me about naive discriminative learning, as it was then called, which is the idea that language is learned not by some special language-specific mechanism, but by a general process of learning, very similar to the way in which we learn other things. And in this framework, a bit like in construction grammar, there's a direct correlation between sound or written form and meaning. And then later on, so I stayed in touch with Harold, and later on I met Yu-Ying Chang, who was one of his postdocs, who's just recently gone back to Taiwan. But Harold, Yu-Ying, and I went on to write a couple of papers together, and I learned just a huge amount from both of them. And one of the things, actually this is a paper that I would have liked to stand here and say it's just being submitted, but actually I think it's going to be submitted this weekend, this coming weekend. This is interesting because it kind of goes back to the idea of pronunciation teaching. So when you teach learners of Chinese as a foreign language, how to pronounce Chinese, they have to learn that there's 4 different tones. So I hope this is going to play. Oops. How do I get this to do it, I wonder? Oh, I'm not getting any sound. Can that be fixed? No, okay. Do we have a Chinese speaker in the room? Okay, so I'm going to have to do it. I can't speak Chinese, so I'm sorry, any Chinese people listening, please forgive me for this. But there are 4. Maybe I go move on, do I? No, never mind. Oh. Try that. He's turned the volume up. It's very quiet. No? Okay, I tell you what, I'm going to listen to it because I can hear it and then I'm going to try and do it. Are you ready? Ma. 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 Okay, I'm sorry, Yu Ying, if you're listening. That must have been excruciating. Okay, but the point is that the direction of the intonation in Chinese completely changes the meaning in a way that it doesn't in English, let's say. But you won't be surprised by now to know that it's not that simple. And this is what native Chinese speakers actually do. So these 3 syllables are all supposed to have the same tone, and this is an actual trace of the pitch. So here's a falling tone, here's another falling tone, and here's another falling tone. Okay, so it's been known for a long time that this simplification of Chinese into 4 tones is far from what actually happens when Chinese speakers speak. And there are, again, you won't be surprised to discover by now, lots and lots of things that we know contribute to the way the tone actually comes out, all of these things. But what Yu Ying and Harold discovered quite by chance is that the identity of the word also has a big effect. And by that we mean that a specific Chinese word, even if it on paper has a particular canonical tone pattern, will have its own F0 contour, its own pitch pattern. So we've been looking at Chinese words, 2-syllable Chinese words, theoretically with a rise-fall pattern. And here are some examples. So in theory, all of these words are pronounced with rise-fall. And you can see that in reality, they differ quite a lot. And we've been thinking that maybe, although it's very hard to teach explicitly, maybe this is part of what people use when they learn language. And maybe it's what part of these phenomenally successful large language models that we're learning about are picking up on. So maybe Chinese speakers, when they learn Chinese, are actually hearing these subtle not consciously, but unconsciously, hearing these subtle differences and learning to associate them with different meanings. Oops, I'll just go back. So, what we've been doing is trying to see if we can teach a computer to learn these associations. And what we can do, because we've got these patterns, we can divide each one of these things into 50 equal spaces. And so you can represent each of these patterns as a vector, we say, a series of 50 numbers. So each of these patterns, so you can take the pitch at each of these points. So this might start at 0, 0.05, 0.1, it keeps going up and then it comes down again. You can represent each shape as a vector of 50 numbers. And then remember that in this model, we're directly mapping form onto meaning. So we need to do something similar with meaning. And the great news is that you can do this with large language models. So we've been using GPT-2, which I guess you've all heard of ChatGPT. Okay, fine. Well, this is not the chat version. You can use GPT-2 to get a numerical representation of the meaning of a specific instance of a word. You don't get 50 numbers. The way we've been doing it, I think you get 700 and something. And then you can plot these in space. So in this, this is 768 dimensions. So you have to imagine a space. So this room has kind of 3 dimensions. It has height, width, and depth. You have to imagine a space with 760-something dimensions. That's the semantic space that we're using. But to help you, it's been reduced here into 2 dimensions because it's kind of easier to see. And you can see that each of these dots is a specific, we say a token, it means a specific instance of someone saying a word. And you can see that they kind of cluster together. So all the tokens of this word are there. Some of them overlap. I mean, this is 3 or 4 words, and they kind of seem to overlap a bit in semantic space. But the point is that we can get a numerical representation of meaning. And then we can do, try to remember back to your school maths. There was something called the line of best fit. So if you plot 2 variables against each other, you get different dots, and then you can try to draw a line through the dots. And then you can say, okay, so if x1 has a value of 14, we would expect x2 to have a value of, I don't know, 10 or something. So by drawing a line of best fit, you can go from one variable to another. So we want to do something similar with sound and meaning, except that in our case, we've got 50 dimensions for sound and 768 for meaning. Secret, I leave this to the postdocs. But the question is, can tonal variation be learned? Can you do this for form and meaning? The answer is yes, to an absolutely astonishing degree. So this is plotting, this is comprehension. So this is starting with sound and going to meaning. And this is testing data. So this is giving the computer tokens that it has never experienced before. And it gets it right. There's 2 different kinds, but it gets it right between 1/3 and 1/2 of the time. That might sound very impressive, but if you were to do this completely by chance, because of the number of words involved, you'd expect it to be getting things right by chance about maybe 3% of the time, 2.8, I think 2.8% of the time, something like that. So this is an order of magnitude greater than you would expect by chance. And bear in mind that this is comprehension from the pitch contour. So it's like if I said to you, Dada, what word is that? It's only getting the pitch, and it's being able to figure out the word 1/3 or even 1/2 of the time on words that it hasn't encountered before. It's astonishing. Same thing for production. You give it the meaning, it can produce the form about 1/3 of the time. So, where does this bring us? It brings us up to 2024. As I said, we're hoping to submit that paper this weekend. And I've ended up with a much more organic view of language than what I started out with, which is maybe fitting because even before I was a psychiatric nurse, I was a natural scientist. I did my first degree in biological sciences, and I'm thrilled to say that one of my undergraduate supervisors is here with me tonight, and 2 of my colleagues who we did our first degree together in botany. So I've ended up with a more organic view of language. A it's funny that it's called constructions actually, because I think it's actually a less mechanical view. A view of language, of constructions as pairing of form and meaning at a very fine-grained, instance-specific level. A lot of what I'm saying here is, I have to say, owes directly to conversations I've been having recently with Harold Byron, and I use the word conversation in my husband's smiling. Hi, Harold. Let's say some of them were quite heated discussions, let's say, but we have reached an accord. Anyway, this is my view, that form consists not of things that you've remembered, but of transitory, auditory, or visual experiences. And meaning is things that are conceptualized by a given speaker at a given point in time, bringing to bear all their world experience. And neither words nor phrases, actually, because do you remember in the modular view, words are stored and phrases aren't. Words are stored and then phrases come from syntax. Actually, I think in my current view, neither words nor phrases are stored. All that's stored is a sort of a set of connection strengths in networks. And idea, because that's what the brain is, really. And if the language isn't in the brain, I don't know where it is. But what have I learned? What have I really learned from all this? Well, I've learned to assume nothing. I think I've got time to just say a quick anecdote. When I was right back in my PhD, when I was eliciting compounds from people, two things stick in my mind particularly. One thing is that I had a colleague who I wanted her to corroborate my auditory judgment of where the stress was. And I said to her, "Can you listen to this, Margaret, and tell me where you think the stress is?" She said, "Oh, I think they're both equally stressed." I said, "Yeah, but which one is more stressed?" She said, no, I hear them both the same, Mel. I said, "Yeah, but which one do you think is stronger?" And she said, "Mel, if you're not going to believe what I tell you, then please don't ask me." And I learned that, not to assume really that what I was wanting her to say she was hearing what I was hearing, but really why, she was right. And then another one of my colleagues, Sarah, she was reading out stuff, and I had combinations of adjective and noun as fillers. And she said, she told me about the orange shirt. She did all the others, and at the end I said, "Sarah, did you know you said orange shirt? That sounded really weird." And she said, "Yeah, well, it was the orange shirt, not the red shirt." And the red shirt was nowhere in there, but she was trying to make sense of it, and she thought the only reason why you would say she told me about the orange shirt was if there was an implicit an implicit contrast somewhere. So I learned from these things never to assume what's in other people's minds. Evidence. Build relationships. Everything that I've done has been collaborative. Absolutely everything. Even my PhD, I was working already with the people in Siegen. And work together. And keep communication open, which basically means listening. I think it's true to say that my relationships with my colleagues haven't always been easy. Sometimes we've, had quite severe disagreements, but somehow we've managed to keep communicating and keep working together. And I hope you'll see that what I've learned actually goes far beyond what I've learned about linguistics. And rules, maybe rules for language learning, maybe rules more generally, are more like guidelines. Thank you.
Under strict instructions to use this because of the broadcast. Melanie, thank you so much. That's such an inciting, inspiring lecture. Just a fantastic kind of exposition of the power of curiosity-driven research. Just really exciting to be taken on your journey and to hear somebody talk so elegantly about 768 dimensions. As if I had any capacity to follow you into that room. It was really, really fantastic. Thank you. Everything we would want from an inaugural lecture, as well as provocative and really, I'm sure, provoking some interesting questions. So I'm going to open up the floor, please, for questions for Melanie. And we are going to ask you, please, to wait for a microphone to reach you so that the question can be captured by the online broadcast people. How are these microphones going to reach people? Are you going to be running around? Excellent. Please get ready. We have a question right here, I think, with Mary. So it's about 3 rows back. Thank you.
Melanie, you don't really need to say how good that was. But in a little community on the 3rd floor of Helmore, which I miss terribly, one of the people I always wanted to praise was you, because I'd got it down to the end to who am I going to learn from. And I don't think I ever did it once without coming out of the room and writing down what I hadn't to forget. And I thought, well, I can't ever teach Melanie anything or show her anything. And I've just done it for your lecture. And I didn't know you were going to use the word rush, honestly. And I did not know you were going to put it in the section and the context. And I did not know that you were going to say that a really brilliant critic in any sort of field brings their whole life experience together to help somebody else. But that's what you did with the word rush. Because there's another word context, a historical one, in which that is used. And that is in the women's suffrage movement, where the suffragettes were going to be arrested, suffragists were going to be arrested because they had produced posters which said, "Rush the House of Commons." And lots of evidence was put up as to why they could not go to prison for this. And it's a really important case. Lord George produced his granddaughter and said, look, Meghan was there. She wasn't worried by the word rush. Good God, what does it mean? What case? What does the word rush mean? And the women who would have got to prison were acquitted because there was a legal ruling that actually said rush means hurry. It does not mean destroy anything. It does not mean frighten people. It does not mean... So what I'm going to give you when I've left your lecture, and I did come in person because you asked me to, as have so many other people, is that little suffrage postcard. Keep it forever. Thank you.
Thank you. I receive it with more than pleasure.
I'm so glad.
Thank you very much. We have a question at the back.
Thank you, Mel, for a really fantastic talk. I'm a developmental psychologist and also a parent of young children. And I was really interested in the stress patterns in the compound nouns. And I wondered if you know, like, when do children start to do this? Does it come about quite naturally? My 7-year-old grumbles because his teacher keeps telling him when he's reading a book to add prosody and intonation, and he's getting really annoyed with it. And so I'm just really interested in whether, you know, children bring this in naturally to their speech as they're learning to talk.
There have been studies done on this, actually, and I'm sorry to say that I can't remember the details at the moment, but if you write to me, I'll send you the papers. But what is interesting, because you mentioned prosody and development, I've actually got a PhD student at the moment, Liam, who I don't know whether he's here either in person or online, because they've got quite a lot on their plate at the moment. But Liam's project is actually looking at the influence of prosody in the development of reading in the early years. And they're looking at, because you know most reading schemes at the moment are like phonics based, so children learn to read sound by sound. And what Liam's looking at is how prosody can be incorporated into phonics schemes. Because of course, if children are reading with meaning, then the prosody, the intonation, the phrasing, the pausing is very important. So, if if you read sound by sound, then the wider meaning is often lost. And so what Liam's looking at is the place of storytelling, of retelling, and general prosodic development in reading schemes in the early years. So, yeah.
Thank you. Do we have any online questions, Laura? Or we don't have any online questions. So let me see if there's another yet. We will get some in a minute. The gentleman here, second row, please.
Thanks for a really fascinating talk. I'm wondering whether the quasi rules that you were talking about earlier on about where the emphasis falls translate into other languages. I know you've clearly done some Chinese, but do we, when we're talking about world this, world that, world the other, in French, do they also put the emphasis on the other word that's associated with the compound noun? I'm not saying specifically French, but you get my drift.
Yes. Well, it's complicated because in French, in French it might be the other way round anyway. And in fact, I think it's no coincidence that the student I was mentioning that had so much difficulty with credit card was Spanish. So in the Romance languages, often it's the other way round in any case. So it's not a red ball, it's a ballon rouge. So it's kind of hard to translate. And the truth is that I haven't looked at it. But I would have. Well, it would be interesting, I just don't know.
Well, it wouldn't be left-right, but it would be the...
Yes, no, would it be the more informative constituent? Teacher, the truth is I don't know, but I mean, as far as I know, putting the emphasis on the more informative constituent should be a universal thing, but I just truthfully don't know.
My French isn't good enough.
No.
Thank you. There's a question up here, please, gentlemen. I think you can chuck it along.
Okay, thank you, Melanie, for this great talk and taking us on this journey. Of course, I'm familiar with much of your research, but not with every aspect. So this was really great. I have a question which I guess could be answered on several levels, and that's about this idea in this framework of discriminatory learning that there are no words, which is something that seems to be very counterintuitive to me as a language user, but also as a scientist in a way. I have a hard time letting go of the word as a unit, as something that we talk about on an everyday basis, as a foreign meaning pair. And I understand the logic behind these foreign meaning associations in NDL and LDL. I know all about this, but it's kind of, I don't know. Do you also have this I don't know, feeling or intuition that it's difficult to let go of this? I don't know.
It's really strange, Anna. It's as if you've been sitting on my shoulder for the last 2 months. Yes, so one of the conversations that Harold and I have been having is exactly about this. So I said, well, you can't say there are no words in the lexicon and then use the term word throughout the paper. So I'm saying we because really, I mean, what I'm saying is my conceptualization, but it owes so much to our conversations that I'm taking the liberty of saying we. I think the point we arrived at was that the word is like, what we would regard as word type is like a cluster of instances. So each token, each instance of a word is is quite an ephemeral thing, especially in speech. But that somehow, if you get a whole pile of tokens that are pretty similar in form and also pretty similar in meaning, then that cluster of tokens somehow comes to represent a word type. So I don't know if that answers your question at all, but that's how I'm conceiving of it at the moment, that a word token is an experience. It's an experience of a conceptualization in conjunction with a linguistic form, whether that's sound or a written form. So far, so good. And then that experience sort of feeds into a network and constantly updates the connection weights in the network. And where you have a set of instances, a set of tokens that are similar both in form and in meaning, then that cluster is basically a word type. That's the best I can do at the moment.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mel. I hope at some point in the future, if you haven't already done so, you do some work with kind of music theorists and music philosophers, because this whole thing about tokens and types and recognition and learning is there's a lot of really interesting similarities to the sound object.
There are some people at an institution not a million miles from here that have done quite a lot of looking into that.
Okay, can I see if there's time for one last question, please? Yes, there is. Sorry. Oh, we have an online question. Laura.
Okay, a question from Bridget. I have a question for Melanie, please. Going back to your opening comment about gratitude, do you think that the words we choose to use can affect how we feel?
Maybe, yes. I mean, one of my daughters has recently introduced me to journaling and writing down every day, 3 things that I feel grateful for and 3 things that have gone well. And it certainly makes you feel better. So yes, absolutely. Having said that, I mean, the same words can mean different things to different people. So I guess you've got to choose words that have a positive connotation for you, but totally. And there's a little story that I heard ages ago about a guy that goes into a shop and he's complaining about something, and the person serving him is just endlessly patient, and he's just totally obnoxious, and they're just endlessly patient. Anyway, I can't remember how the interaction ends, but he goes home, and the fact that she's been so endlessly patient with him makes him feel better, and suddenly things seem better. She goes home and kicks the cat. And I think you really can, I'm trying to learn to be more separate from people so that I'm not so kind of at the mercy of their emotions, because I kind of get really upset if people aren't nice to me, But I feel great if they are nice to me. And I'm trying to be not so dependent in that way. But I think the fact is that people are sensitive to one another, and the way you treat people matters.
What a fantastic way to end. Melanie, for me, huge thanks and congratulations. A really delightful evening and an excellent lecture. Thank you very much. But I am going to pass over to Catherine, who's formally going to thank you on behalf of the faculty.
Melanie, that was absolutely amazing. I will be double checking my Friday email to you all. You made me really self-conscious about speaking and writing and everything. Fascinating. So thank you very, very much. I knew you'd be great. You were amazing. Small token from all of us, just to remember your night.
Thank you.
Many, many thanks.
Thank you. I did see on the schedule that I was going to get a gift, but I don't know.
Don't let it change. Don't let it change you. And then, Laura, thank you very much to you and all the team that have put the evening together. As ever, it's really been a pleasure to work with you, and thank you for looking after us all so well. And I think you told me I've got one more thing to say, which is refreshments are served in Lab 002 in the foyer out there.
Just follow us.
Follow them. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And again, congratulations, Mel.
Thank you. Thank you.